Modern audiences often associate the Book of the Dead with curses, mummies, and dusty tombs. But to the ancient Egyptians, this sacred text was anything but ominous. Known in their language as the Book of Going Forth by Day, it was a work of profound spiritual technology. A guide written not for the living but for the soul, to help it survive death and emerge victorious on the other side. This video explores the Book of the Dead not as a literary artifact, but as a living document of religious practice, moral philosophy, and psychological insight. Rooted in a framework that conceived the human being as a composite of multiple spiritual components, the Ka, Ba, Akh, Ren, and Shut, the Book of the Dead served as a lifeline to help the deceased navigate a perilous afterlife journey through the Duat. It provided spells to repel serpents, open gates, silence the accusing heart, and ultimately stand justified before the gods in the Hall of Two Truths. We examine the structure of the text, the material culture of its production, and the rituals that animated it, in life and after death. We explore the soul's final destination, the field of reeds, and compare Egypt's vision of the afterlife to other religious traditions. We also discuss how modern misconceptions, colonial-era Egyptology, and popular culture have distorted the book's true function. Ultimately, the Book of Going Forth by Day reveals a civilization that viewed death not as annihilation, but as a continuation, one that depended entirely on how one lived. In that, it offers not only a window into ancient Egyptian belief, but a mirror for our own enduring questions about life, death, and what might follow. To modern minds, death is often thought of as an absence, the cessation of breath, of brain activity, of identity. But to the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end. It was a threshold, a rite of passage into a realm as real and structured as the world of the living. And like any journey across a dangerous landscape, it required preparation, protection, and guidance. This preparation was not metaphorical. It was physical, cultural, and deeply spiritual. It involved architecture, tombs built as eternal homes. It involved ritual, mummification, offerings, and sacred chants. It involved memory, ensuring the name would be spoken and the soul remembered. But above all, it involved text. The so-called Book of the Dead was never a single, fixed book. More accurately, it was a personalized collection of magical religious spells. It evolved over centuries, composed and recomposed for kings, priests, artisans, and commoners alike. The Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Going Forth by Day. The title alone tells us everything. The goal was not to rest in darkness, but to emerge triumphant into light. This light was not metaphorical. It was the light of Ra, the solar deity who journeyed every night through the underworld, the Duat, only to rise again in the east. Just as the sun was reborn each morning, so too could the soul, if properly prepared, go forth by day. But the journey was perilous. The Duat was not a void, but a densely populated spiritual realm. It was filled with lakes of fire, gates guarded by lion-headed serpents, and monstrous judges who asked riddles or demanded passwords. Only a soul armed with the right knowledge, names, and spells could pass safely. The Book of the Dead was that armament. It was not a passive collection of beliefs. It was a manual for action, a toolkit for the dead, a map written for those who had left time but not destiny. The Egyptian conception of the soul was profoundly complex. Unlike many later religious traditions that framed the soul as a singular entity, the Egyptians believed that a human being was composed of several interconnected spiritual parts, each with its own function and each requiring preservation or transformation after death. Ka, the life force, or vital double. Created at birth by the gods, the Ka required sustenance after death in the form of food, drink, incense, and prayers. Offerings left in tombs were not symbolic. They were essential nourishment for the Ka. Ba, the personality or mobility of the soul. Often depicted as a human-headed bird, the Ba could leave the tomb, return to revisit the living, and travel between realms. The Ba ensured that the deceased remained present in the world, not as a ghost, but as a continuing presence. Akh, the most exalted form of the soul. It was a luminous, transfigured being created through ritual perfection and moral purity. An AKH could join the imperishable stars, dwell among the gods, or live eternally in the field of reeds. Ren, the secret name. To know the Ren was to know the essence. It had to be preserved. Carved into tomb walls, written on shrouds, spoken by descendants, erasure of the Ren meant obliteration from existence. Shoot, the shadow. Mysterious and often overlooked, the shoot was a spiritual double that accompanied the person and remained after death. Statues and images contained the shoot's imprint. It too had to be protected. The Duat was not a place of eternal punishment. It was a liminal zone, a cosmic underworld through which both the sun and the soul must pass to be reborn. Its geography was fluid, part river, part desert, part star map. Within the Duat were 12 gates, each associated with a different hour of the night. Lakes of fire burning away impurity, divine gatekeepers who asked questions or demanded passwords, serpents such as Apep, Apophis, the embodiment of chaos, caverns containing the secret bodies of gods and magical knowledge. To pass through the Duat was to master its dangers. But its goal was not punishment. It was purification and renewal. The Book of the Dead gave the soul the tools to do this, providing spells to open gates, summon protective deities, and transform the self into animals, gods, or celestial forces. The Duat was the soul's night journey toward dawn. Emerging from the Duat, the soul entered the Hall of Two Truths, a divine courtroom presided over by Osiris, god of the dead. Here, the central drama of the afterlife unfolded, the weighing of the heart. The heart, believed to be the seat of the intellect and conscience, was placed on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the principle of truth, order, justice, and harmony. The judgment was immediate and absolute. If the scale balanced, the soul was pronounced true of voice and permitted to enter eternal life. If the heart was heavier than the feather, weighed down by falsehood or wrongdoing, it was devoured by Amit, a fearsome hybrid of crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus. This judgment was not a test of belief, but of ethical conduct. The Book of the Dead's most famous component, Spell 125, provided the negative confession, a list of 42 declarations of innocence, each addressed to a different deity. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not caused pain. I have not desecrated offerings. I have not been deaf to truth. This was not a plea, it was a claim, a declaration that one had lived in Ma'at. The book also included heart spells, spells 30A and 30B, beseeching the heart not to speak against the soul during judgment. This reveals a deep psychological insight. The Egyptians knew that the harshest judge is often the one within. The goal was not perfection, but alignment, with Ma'at, with the cosmos, with one's higher self. Beyond judgment lay the field of reeds, called Seket Aru, a paradisiacal realm where the justified soul lived forever. But this paradise was not an abstract heaven. It was a perfected Egypt, flowing canals mirroring the Nile, verdant fields, always fertile, eternal harvests without labor or hunger, reunions with loved ones and ancestors, communion with the gods, especially Osiris and Ra. But paradise was not entirely idle. Souls were expected to contribute. Ushabti figurines were buried to take on this labor when summoned by spell 6. If I am called to work, you shall say, here I am. This vision was deeply agrarian and harmonic. It reflected what the Egyptians valued most: stability, renewal, family, and order. The afterlife was not escape, it was restoration. In this way, the Book of the Dead was not about fleeing death, but about completing life. Each spell in the Book of the Dead was purposeful, precise, and powerful. The Egyptians believed that speech was creation. To speak was to cause to be. Hence, the spells were not wishes, they were acts. Transformation, spells 76-88. Become a falcon, lotus, phoenix, or crocodile to navigate the Duat. Protection, spells 31-42. Ward off serpents, crocodiles, and demonic entities. Judgment, spell 125. Present your moral case in the Hall of Two Truths, naming, spells 1-17. Identify with gods, celestial bodies, and cosmic principles. Empowerment, spells 2630. B. Control your heart, your name, your destiny. Each spell was tailored. Wealthier Egyptians might include dozens, others only a few, often with blank spaces for names to be later filled in. Some scrolls were mass-produced, others, like the Papyrus of Ani, were lavishly customized, with vivid illustrations and extensive text. These were not recitations. They were ritual technologies, spoken with precision, animated by belief, and backed by centuries of tradition. The Book of the Dead was as much a material artifact as a spiritual guide, written on papyrus, often up to 20 meters long. Text divided by red ink, rubrication, with divine names and instructions. Illustrations, vignettes, included scenes of judgment, transformation, and celestial maps. Scribes were highly trained. Some scrolls bear the names of their authors. Tombs were designed to protect the scrolls, keeping them safe for eternity. Artisans worked in the Valley of the Kings and Deir el-Medina, creating these texts with both care and reverence. The physical book was buried with the body, activating its power. It was not a metaphor, it was a companion. Behind every Book of the Dead was a network of ritual specialists. Priests of Anubis oversaw embalming, chanting spells to sanctify the body. Funerary temples ensured ongoing offerings to nourish the Ka. Scribes tailored spells, sometimes altering them for personal or regional theology. Rituals like the opening of the mouth allowed the deceased to eat, speak, and breathe again. The Book of the Dead was not just spiritual insurance, it was part of a thriving economy of remembrance. Death in Egypt was a social project. The Book of the Dead was not static. It evolved from earlier traditions, pyramid texts, Old Kingdom, reserved for kings, focused on ascent to the stars, coffin texts, Middle Kingdom, painted on coffins, opened access to elites, Book of the Dead, New Kingdom onward, portable, democratized, widely used. Later came Duat, Book of Gates, and Book of Caverns, more esoteric, focusing on cosmic transformation. This evolution reflects a shift from royal to universal salvation. Over time, the afterlife became accessible not through bloodline, but through virtue, memory, and magic. Modern misconceptions have clouded the book's meaning. 19th century Orientalism romanticized Egypt as mystical and irrational. European collectors dubbed it the Book of the Dead, obscuring its true name. Hollywood turned it into a book of curses and resurrection rituals. In truth, it is a manual for moral living, a ritual archive of memory and transformation. A theological text as complex and nuanced as any in world history. Misreading it as mere magic is a disservice. Its true power lies in its wisdom. The Book of the Dead is not a relic of superstition. It is one of the most thoughtful, poetic, and morally serious works in the history of human civilization. It asks, who are you when your titles fall away? What do you carry when your body is dust? What remains when the silence comes? It answers, your truth, your name, your voice. To the Egyptians, death was not an erasure, it was a test of what you had become. The Book of the Dead was not a shortcut to salvation, but a tool for transformation. It reminded the soul of what it must say, what it must remember, and who it must become to join the sun in rising again. To speak was to act. To name was to endure. In an age obsessed with control, power, and permanence, the book offers a humbler, wiser vision. That eternity belongs not to the strong, but to the just. That memory is the antidote to oblivion. That death, if faced rightly, reveals not the end, but a door. To go forth by day is to declare that truth can be carried through darkness. Even now, in the silence of tombs and the ink of forgotten scrolls, the dead speak. And what they say is this: I have not lied, I have not killed, I have not forgotten who I am. I go forth by day.